Hello and welcome to Fireside Fairytales. If you've never been here before, my name is Rory and you're watching Varietal Literature's YouTube page. And what we do here is set up a cozy little corner of the internet for narrative. And on Tuesday nights, what we specifically do is read old folklore and fairy tales, a bit of sound effects, some voices, a little bit of performing. And if you're interested in folklore, then I think you might enjoy it. Tonight's theme is specifically Brittany folklore, which I'll say a little bit on, but I've said a bit before. Bretons is a little subculture, one of the original Celtic tribes. And yeah, we're going to read stories about folks who are sort of social pariahs for one reason or another, never for fair reasons, and then use their noble character to pull themselves up in status. And it's supposed to be heartwarming as long as you don't think about it too much. If you're not watching this live, down in the description below, there will be timestamps that let you jump to the beginning of whatever story interests you the most. We're going to read two stories tonight, the second one being the longest. But if you don't, if you're not watching this live, then what you should do is join the live chat. Remember, it's on the opposite side. I'm just staring at my couch now, but you don't know that until I said it. The live chat is already growing a little crop of potatoes, including Lizzie Rose, GS, Tammy Morelli, who recently got some terrible news, and I'm very sorry to hear that, Tammy. As GS said, when it rains, it pours. Jum Store, and I'm sure fairly soon we are going to also get Zombie Wolf. And maybe a few others. But you can join in there and talk about the stories and what you see and what you liked and what you didn't like about them as they're happening. Lizzie Rose said, guess what, guys? I ordered all 3 volumes of Simon Roy Hughes' translation and they arrived today. Well, awesome. I hope you enjoy them. I know that, I've been reading stories from them for about 2 years now because I was on his Patreon and we got the translations early. Did you get the ones with the commentary or without? Obviously, for the folks who want to, Simon Roy Hughes is a translator, a contemporary translator, not some, dead old man from the 19th century. A current translator who translated the entire collection of folk tales, the complete Asbjornsen and Moe. I forget the name of it, but anyways, it says Bjornson and Moe's big collection of Norwegian folklore, which has existed in Norway for over a century, but has never really been properly and fully translated to English. Pieces of it have come over, and there's been some shabby translations over the years, but this is the first one that translates all the notes, all of it. And there's 2 versions. There's one that just has the stories, and then there's one that has the stories and the commentary. And I've got to be honest, I genuinely think that second one is worth it. Even if you're not like an academic and you're mostly in it for the stories, there are sort of meta stories in those commentaries that I think are worth reading, especially if you're a writer. Lizzie Rose says, with commentary, obviously. Oh, very much so. Yeah, if you want that, see if I remember to post it again. It was on our last Fireside Fairytales. I did pin it. I did remember to post it, but it's on Amazon. He self-publishes his translation, and to self-publish and have international reach, you don't have a lot of options, so Amazon is pretty much his only option. Simon Roy Hughes is the translator, the complete something of something. I gotta look up the name. Anyways, you should absolutely buy it if you like folklore. It's kind of the definitive collection of Norwegian folklore, even before he translated it, and now it's in English from a very solid and friendly man who I encourage you to follow on Mastodon as well. Anyhow, by the way, that's not in a sponsorship. I just like the books. I'm not getting any kickbacks for that. Well, it's really good that they already came. I know that Simon was a little upset that, well, not upset, but he was a little concerned that he wasn't able to see the finished product, the physical bound finished product before it reached other people in other places because of how Amazon works. But as far as I know, they're all in pretty solid condition and there aren't any complaints. Lizzie Rose thanking me for my very strange little video last week where I read a Dr. Seuss poem. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I hope it helped some people. All right. Well, that's enough babbling from me. If you are not watching this live, I'll remind you that you can use the timestamps and skip over all of this. Yeah, Lizzie Rose can tell you the full title of the books. You'd think I'd be prepared. No, I guess you wouldn't. If you watch the stream, I am in every way the artist. Okay, let's talk about tonight's tales. I'm characterizing this as folklore of the pariah. There are pariah, of course, being a sort of old word. I mean, it still maintains the meaning of being sort of low in social standing. But as I understand it, I think actually it was originally a caste in India. But I wouldn't pretend to know the details of that. I think that's the origin of the word, though. Anyways, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about people that exist on the lower rungs of the ladder for one reason or another. In one case, it's a fellow with a hump on his back, which will be the first one that we see. And in the other case, it's a little more complex why he's low on the ladder, but it's no less unfair. And like, you know, the ugly duckling and all those kinds of stories, that structure that we've seen before, the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, ugly duckling, which are not really traditional, well, ugly duckling kind of is, but Rudolph aren't like traditional old folklore. They do take from a structure that exists in folklore, which is somebody is, you know, characterized as hideous and horrible, and then it turns out actually they're pretty useful to people who look normal, and that's the structure of the story. And I say all of that with my tongue firmly in my cheek because that is said quite literally, but it's it's one of those things that's only a happy story if you don't think about it for too long. Oh, there we are. Lizzie Rose says, the complete Norwegian folktales and legends of Asbjornsen and Mo. There are 3 volumes. Absolutely. Thank you. Okay. So anyways, tonight's stories, both of them come from the same collection, Popular Legends of Brittany, which means they are from the culture of Brittany, which we've discussed many times before because we've been working through this book every few weeks, read a few more stories. I actually think this might be the last one. There might be one more story I haven't read. There's actually 2, but there's too much damage to that story that I can't actually read it on stream because it's a physical book that's been scanned, and you'll see that some of the sentence structures are weird and stuff. That process introduces some problems, and the book itself was actually damaged in the first place. And so there's a story in there called The Origin of the Bat, which I wanted to read, but a big chunk of the story is missing because the page is ripped. Anyhow, we're talking about Brittany. It is a region in northwest France, a culture, and a people now situated in northwest France, but not originally necessarily from there. They were more situated in South England originally as one of the 6 Celtic nations, though obviously the lesser known of them. But that is to say, they are a very old culture. at least from first millennia. So like, I think the immigration from South England was like 6th century or something like that. Anyways, they are a distinct ethnic group with their own language. Still has presence today, now in Northwest France. And these two tales concern folks who are, for one reason or another, precluded or shunned from full participation in society, or at least acceptance by their community, which I think is probably going to characterize the first one more. Each tale offers a different path out of their situation for their maligned protagonist, or at least a path to greater acceptance by their community. And emphasizing a different moral standard being their saving grace. Ultimately, though, the stories fall into the same, in my view, mistake that most folklore does when it tries to tackle topics like this, which is that a good soul or useful acts will deliver you from your wretched form into something acceptable, rather than questioning why someone with such conditions should be considered unacceptable in the first place. I guess we can say the heart is in the right place with these tales, but they are definitely drawn back by some of the morals of their time. Also, just one more time, a reminder that the process of digitizing a book from a scan, especially with this, is like a 60 or 70-year-old library book, based on some of the other scan information I have on it, introduces faults and flaws into the readout. Sometimes it'll be broken up weird. Sometimes sentence will actually be out of order. I'll try to catch that before I read it aloud, but apologies if I just sort of get into the stream of it and don't notice that. We'll also see little patches of the original scan page in there, and occasionally a missing word or two or a misspelled one. Okay. Yes. Morning, James Earl Jones, one of the great actors. Okay. I did some exercise before this stream, and so now my mouth is dry. Our first story tonight is called The Gifts to the Dwarves, and it comes from Popular Legends of Brittany, which is a book you can get through Google's book scanning service, digitized or just the scanned PDF for free. It is an old collection. In this tale includes the spelling of dwarfs in what is actually technically the proper spelling in English. But if you are a Tolkien fan, you will know that the DWARVES version of it is a Tolkien invention, though he swore by it, and exactly why is debatable. But I think he kind of won, because most people do the V version, but technically, in English, DWARFS is the correct spelling of this. A great many years ago, there lived an old man in a village who, with his wife, used to go year in and year out to work for other people and thus earn their living. Benedict was the poorest man in the village, but what was denied him in worldly goods was amply made up to him in two other endowments, one of which was very desirable and the other as undesirable. Namely, he had a very excellent heart and a terrible hump on his back. The first gained him many friends and endeared him to everybody, but by reason of the latter he often had to endure unfeeling jests of the idle vagabonds of the streets. And indeed, this hump was a little too big, for if Benedict wished to sit down, he must either take a chair without a back, or else let himself down, flat on the floor, because this burdensome embellishment of this was forever in the way. Even his wife, who loved him dearly, and who before their marriage never thought anything at all about the hump, in the course of a year began to think it was rather uncomely, and she would often say, "Oh, dear Benedict, how handsome you would be if your back was a little more slender. I believe you'd be the handsomest man in the whole village." This reminds me of the time I wore a suit and my partner said I looked like a fat Ryan Gosling. Is it a compliment? This observation Benedict had to hear repeated one day when he was returning with his wife from their day's labor. They'd been turning hay for a rich neighbor, and as they were not lazy hirelings who ran away from their work as soon as the prayer bell sounded, but were willing to labor until their work was done, they came home unusually late. The meadows in which they'd been at work lay a long distance from the village. The stars already twinkled high in heaven, and the night was far advanced. Benedict must cross a wide heath, which was not considered safe by night, but he had never done harm to man or beast, and so he had a clear conscience and was afraid of nothing. "Come, Lizette," said he. "Let's make haste. Get over the heath as soon as possible, for wicked dwarfs live there, who compel belated wanderers to dance until their breath gives out. And they are found the next morning lying dead out in the open air." So they walked hastily on, but when they came to the middle of the heath, where a great quantity of stone blocks were lying about, among which the dwarfs dwell, a long row of little kobolds rushed out upon them. Pausing for a moment, he just said dwarfs, and then he said kobolds. What is going on? The truth is, I don't want to delay the story long enough to explain all of this. There's two versions of kobolds that are quite different. In the English version of kobolds, they're sort of subterranean creatures for which the name of the metal cobalt comes from, which was considered to be kind of magical metal, so touched by the kobolds in some way. And they're sort of little creatures that are menacing and very much like they are in D&D. Not exactly, though, but that more like that. Then there's the kobolds in German culture, which is a tricky one because they have kind of their own kobolds, but kobold is also a word that can mean several things that we have different words for. Goblins can be kobolds, dwarves can be kobolds, which is what I think is happening here, because keeping in mind that, well, this is a Celtic nation, it is one that sort of spread a little bit, probably was influenced by Germany. Probably. That's a guess on my part. So by kobolds, it's just a different, more general term for dwarf here. They're not referring to kobolds as you would understand them. Among which the dwarfs dwell, a long row of little kobolds rushed out upon them. Some of them carried great horns which they blew, and the others, with hands joined, danced about. Forming a great circle around Benedict and his wife, whom they thus enclosed in their midst. "Ah, caray," cried Benedict to his wife, "we are lost if the dwarfs force us to dance. It is all over with us." Dame Lizette clung tightly to her husband and could not speak for her terror. The dwarfs were actually making preparation to force the good people to dance, but they had no sooner approached Benedict than they started with a loud shriek and cried in a singing tone, "Let him go! Let him go! The sickle protects him! Ah, the sickle protects him! Safe away! Let him go!" "Aha!" thought Benedict. They are afraid of the sickle. In my whole life I never thought the thing was of any other use than to cut grass." He drew his wife hastily along with him, and they soon reached their home in safety. But all night, Benedict's thoughts were very busy. He thought about the hump, which his wife had today for the third time, commented that it was so ugly, and about the dwarfs, who understood so many arts and who were so afraid of his sickle. He said not a word, but in the morning when he got up, he thought, "I know what I will do." At evening, he contrived it so that he should go home alone, and he waited till the stars were glistening in the night sky like millions of precious gems, for nobody dared at that late hour to go near the heath. And then he took his sickle in his hand and went straight to the heath. Well, the dwarfs saw him coming, and when he was a good way off, and they called out in a friendly way, "See, there comes Benedict!" "Yes," answered Benedict. "Now I know that you live in my neighborhood. I've come to pay you a visit." "That is brave," cried the dwarfs. "Will you dance a little with us?" "Do not take ill, dear little people, but I am very short-breathed, and I could not hold out long." "We will stop as soon as you say so." "Will you promise me that?" said Benedict, who thought it would be no harm to have one round with the little dwarfs, for the sake of getting into their good graces. "We promise it," answered the little people. "Swear it by my sickle." "We swear it by your sickle." And Benedict then trusted the little people, stepped into their ring, and the dance began. The dwarfs sang as they danced, but it was always the same thing over and over and over and over again. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Benedict bore this for a while, and then he stood still and said, "All due deference to you, little people, but your song is horribly monotonous. You always stick it in the middle of the week, and you never get over the middle. With your permission, I will add another line, but you must put up with it, good or bad, for I'm no rhymester." "Excellent! Let us hear," cried the dwarfs, and Benedict began to sing. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, likewise say. And the dwarfs manifested the most lively emotion. "Bravo! Bravo!" they cried and crowded around Benedict. "Thou art an unequaled poet and canst dance famously. Sing it once more." And Benedict sang it over again. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, likewise say. And the dwarfs whirled in their dizzy dance, as if mad with joy, and then hastened again to Benedict and cried out all at once, "What desirest thou? Beauty thou mayest, hast thou..." Sorry, this is the broken up sentence here. "What desirest thou? Beauty? Hast thou any wish? Wilt thou have riches, or beauty, or fame? Thou mayest ask, and we will fulfill it." "Are you In earnest? Asked Benedict, surprised. Sober earnest? Wish! Wish! Now then, Benedict said, look here, I have a hump which is like none of the best, and it does not seem to please my wife any better. Could you offer me help off with it? Oh, never fear that. Come here. They seized Benedict and began to toss him like a ball from one to the other till he made the round of the whole circle. It's all over with thee now, thought Benedict, as he flew briskly through the air. The dwarfs have betrayed thee, and when he came back to the first dwarf, you placed him quietly on his feet again. And Benedict's hump was gone, and he had become so trim and handsome that his own mother would have never known him. Just to clarify something, in our modern telling, trim there would mean he's fit now, but that's not what they mean. What they mean is his back isn't as fat as it was. It's been trimmed. At first, his wife would not receive him into the house at any rate. Benedict had to tell her how many shirts he had lying in his chest and how many spots were on his working coat, until at last she believed him and allowed him to tell her how he had become so changed. She scolded him somewhat, though, because he had risked himself among the wicked dwarfs. Why do you think he risked himself? Because of what you were saying. Tell the story, Rory. But her joy at seeing him so beautified was plainly enough to be read in her face. The hut that Benedict lived in belonged to his neighbor, a tailor who was a very spruce little man and very rich. But he was extremely avaricious, and stuttered a little. The tailor had been dunning Benedict for his house rent for several days, and when he observed the change which Benedict had undergone, the landlord became envious of his good luck, for a covetous person cannot help feeling pain whenever anything good happens to another, let the thing be ever so trifling or innocent. He thought it must have been brought about in some very unusual way, and he determined to sift the matter right down to the bottom. So he went to Benedict, demanded the house rent again, and threatened to turn him out of the house if he did not pay him on the spot. Well, Benedict begged him to wait for a couple of days till he received his wages, and then he should be able to discharge the debt. But the grasping tailor would give no pardon. At last, after long entreaty, he said, I will wait 3 days if you will tell me how you got rid of your hump. Well, Benedict told him the whole story, and also imparted to him the secret of the sickle. Beauty and riches, thought the tailor. That will not be a difficult choice. One can wish according to his fancy. And as soon as the moon was in the sky, he went right back down to that heath, and there he soon found the dwarfs among the stones as they had before. And they were singing the old verse with the addition that Benedict had made to it the previous night. And they danced merrily in a circle, and then the tailor danced with them. And after he'd gone round in the ring some time, he stopped and called out, would he like to add a line also? Well, the dwarfs, as you can imagine, were delighted. Sing, they cried, sing! And they themselves began, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, likewise say, sing, 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 cried they at the old tailor, stammering began the tailor. Saturday? Go on, cried the dwarfs. Saturday, there too, but the tailor could get no farther. The sweat stood in big drops on his forehead, and his heart thumped like a hammer. And the dwarfs ran about wildly and seemed to be angry with the tailor to interrupt them for such a feeble line. And at last they ranged themselves around him and said, "Since you have changed our verse somewhat, you shall have your wish. Choose between beauty and riches." Well, the tailor recovered some fresh courage. "Here," said he, "Benedict has chosen beauty, but that you may not have to grant the same thing twice, I'll take what Benedict did not wish for." And the dwarfs, they instantly seized him and flung him from one hand to another through the circle, and when he'd reached the last, his wish was fulfilled, but not in the sense that he meant. In other words, given the choice between beauty and riches, given that Benedict had chosen beauty, he meant he wanted riches. But what Benedict truly did not wish for was the hump between his shoulders. And with insults and abuse, the dwarfs drove him from the heath. The tailor was raving over this disaster, and like most people who are always ready to shift the blame of mischief they have brought upon themselves upon others, he cried out that Benedict had misled him, and he swore to be revenged upon him, and he shut himself up 2 whole days. On the evening of the second day, he sent word to Benedict that if he did not pay the rent the next morning, he would have him expelled from the house and would sell all that was in it. Benedict had expected that the tailor would wait 1 day longer, for that's what he promised in exchange for the information about the dwarfs. But when he received this message and heard the people in the village whispering to each other that the tailor now carried Benedict's hump, then he lost all hope, understanding what had happened. In great distress, he took the sickle and went back to the heath. The dwarfs were again singing under the moonlight their song with Benedict's addition, and with the tailor's addition. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, likewise say, Saturday there too. Sad as Benedict was, he could not help laughing. "That does not jingle well at all," said he. "Ah, there is our Benedict! Yes, that is a poor rhyme." "Well, let's see, perhaps the thing might be improved," said Benedict, and he began to sing. "Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, likewise say. Add the Saturday there too. Sunday we have naught to do." "Bravo, bravo!" cried the dwarfs. "Benedict is our deliverer. He has completed the verse that was given us, and we are released from our dance." And so they crowded round Benedict and told him that as a punishment for some improper use they had made of their power some years back, they'd been condemned to dwell on this heath and dance the livelong night till someone should finish their verse, and the first words of which were furnished them. "How pleased they are," thought Benedict. "Now will be a good time to present my petition." And then he complained to the dwarfs, not in our sense, just about the problems he had, that he was obliged to suffer for what they'd done to the tailor, and that he would next morning be turned out of his house and have all his property sold if he did not pay the rent. "Oh, Do not give yourself any uneasiness about that. We leave the heath now, and we shall gladly show ourselves grateful to our deliverer, Benedict. Look, here between the stones lies 12 sacks. They shall be yours. Take them, carry them to your house. Benedict thanked them, took his leave, and went home with his sacks. When he got home, he threw his heavy load on the floor and called to his wife. Kindle a fire, fasten the doors and window, so that our neighbor may see nothing of the riches I've brought home. Zounds, how heavy it was! Must be enough to buy 3 whole villages. And the wife did as he said, and then she hastened back and opened one sack after another, and in every one there was nothing but sand, dry leaves, pebble stones, and at this sight she uttered a loud cry. Here, see what thou hast. I've always told ye that nothing good could come from the dwarves, if it only does not bring more misfortune to our house. While Benedict stood stupefied, in his fright, the sickle which he still held fell from his hand. Now, it's not been mentioned before, nor will it ever be explained why this matters, but it was a handle of hazelwood, and it fell exactly into the sack on the floor of sand and leaves and rocks. And immediately, those sand, leaves, and rocks changed into gold pieces, and its pebble stones into diamonds, and that sand into pearls. Benedict perceived now the hazelwood possessed peculiar powers, not to merely make a bad boy behave himself, but to change enchanted treasure back again to what they originally were. He tried the same experiment with the remaining sacks and became at once the richest man in the place, to the great vexation of the tailor, who would gladly have seen himself in Benedict's place, but in his greedy avarice had only brought upon himself a most unwelcome acquisition. Observe now, content is far better than avarice. A moral that I don't know if I agree with. I agree with it, I guess, in the sense that, avarice is bad. But I think probably this moral more comes out of the fact of, don't you peasants come for my stuff. Lizzie Rose says, the fairies in another story sing the same song. It's an Irish story collected by Yeats. Yes, I think I have seen it. I don't know that I've read it. I've read a lot from that book, though, from Yeats's collection. The story also has a humpback in it. The fairies like his song enough, they take away his hump. That makes sense because, again, we're reading from Bretons, who are one of the Celtic nations, and the Celtic nations tend to pass around a lot of similar folklore. But that is a really good connection to draw. Thanks, Lizzie. And I did notice earlier, and I forgot to mention it, Jump Store, I noticed that you had the migraine, and I'm very sorry to hear about that. I felt like I was almost getting one today, but I managed to keep it off. Zombie Wolf was making macarons for the first time, and they need a bit of concept. They're very tricky. That is a hard piece of baking to do. I'm late. That's okay. You can't be late to this show. It is A, about being chill, and B, oh, there's another story. Nobody go anywhere. Nobody go anywhere. We got a second story. This is the shorter story. This is a long episode. Yeah, we got a story left. So you're gonna have to repost your random trivia. Let me just get to it. There it is. Okay. That's fair, because I've been ending around 40 minutes lately, but It's a bit cooler today, although it's still getting pretty warm in here. I may have to turn on the air conditioning before the end of this tale. It's a bit cooler today, and so I decided I would go a little longer. Oh, yes, I was saying jump story. I'm very sorry to hear that you feel terrible. Okay. This is the longer one. This is an epic, really. Is it an epic? Like in the traditional sense? It's probably not an epic in the traditional sense. It doesn't have like world-ending stakes, but it is a big journey, if you will. I guess this is a weird thing to say, but I guess the thing that really stood out for me about this tale is it feels like a game. Like it feels like the structure for a tabletop RPG or an RPG or something or whatever else, including the rather quirky main character that is here. I am going to turn on the air conditioning in a minute. Yeah, it's been pretty warm here too for September. Usually September, it's pouring rain here, but not at least so far. Okay, it is getting dark here though, but that's because we're in the north. I say the north. I'm not really that. I mean, I'm north of the equator. Anyways. Our last story of the night, and our longest story of the night, is called Silly Peter. It also comes to us from Popular Legends of Brittany. And it is quite the adventure with magic and monsters and high stakes. Peter was called throughout the place nothing else than Silly Peter. And he put up with this, because he was in fact a little simple. Though in his own way he was shrewd enough, only he kept this to himself, and besides, the people meant no harm by this nickname. Did they? Did they mean no harm? On the contrary, they rather liked him. They always gave him the remains of their dinners. He used to go all around the town, and with his mouth set wide open and his great staring eyes glowering about without any particular business of his own. His parents had died when he was quite young, and he'd grown up wild and untutored. But still, he never did any harm to anybody. When he was thirsty, he went to the well and drank, and when he was hungry, he went to the first housewife that he saw standing at her door and ate what was left from her table. When he was sleepy, he crept into a barn and went to sleep in the straw. Considering his circumstances, Peter was not so badly dressed after all. He had an excellent pair of linen trousers that lacked nothing but the waistband, a jacket with one sleeve, and half a cap, which had once been new. And when he had eaten, he was always in high spirits, and he sang merrily out of the joy of his heart, and there was only one thing that he knew how to do well, and that was to trill like a singing bird. I cannot trill, but we'll take some whistling instead. And he could imitate the lark best of all. You should look up the noise of a lark. It's very unique and memorable. So he lived just like a bird. Eat and drank whenever he could get the wherewithal, and when he was sleepy, he went to sleep. Just to add my own editorial here, he was living the dream. At the time that Silly Peter lived, the earth looked very different from what it does now. There were then great woods, many 100 miles long, and ancient knights, and great giants lived in those days, and they were a great many other wonderful things that flew across the skies, scurried in the caves of mountains, and ruled from high peaks. So it was that one day, was long after the noon bell had rung, and Silly Peter felt excessively hungry as he came by a very neat farmhouse. So he stepped in, asked for something to eat, and the farmer's wife was just washing up her dishes as Peter came in. And when she heard his voice, she left her work and set before him the little half-tub in which she'd scraped the fragments that were left off the dinner, and said, "There, my poor little Peter, eat as much as you want, and say a pater noster for our swine, that they may fatten well." Silly Peter had let himself down on the ground, took the tub between his knees, and searched in it for something to eat, but he found very little, for there had been a great many forks in the plates and a great many spoons in the bowls that day, and so that there was not much left for him in the tub. However, when Peter had done, he licked his fingers, murmured a prayer of thankfulness, as if he had never eaten anything so delicious in his life. "There was some excellent dumpling there," said he. "It must have been made of the finest flour and prepared by one of the best cooks." Well, the farmer's wife was just going away, but she caught these words, and she felt very much flattered. So she turned back to Silly Peter and said, "Poor boy, wait a moment, I'll bring you a bit of bread." I won't zoom this picture in because it is the icon picture, and it is sideways in this book. But it's them eating the meal he eventually wins. Sorry, as I said, I did some exercise, so I'm a little congested. And so she actually brought him out a thick slice of bread with a nice, delicate crust and a most delicious crumb. Well, Silly Peter bit into it like a hungry wolf, and he cried out that there could be but one baker in the world who knew how to bake such bread as that. Well, this flattered the farmer's wife still more. Thought she. How would he relish it if he had a bit of my fresh made butter to eat with it? And so she went quickly into the house, brought out a piece of her best butter, which Silly Peter accepted with no little delight. Now, how he extolled the farmer's wife and her butter. In the whole village, for miles around, there was not another person understood making such butter as that. How many things were necessary to make that good a butter? Clean vessels, the most careful attention to the cows, rich pasture, verily a bit of beef from cows that gave such butter must be delicious. He's not simple at all. The increasing self-complacency of the farmer's wife led her to bring Silly Peter a nice piece of beef. This went on till she went in again and again and brought the delighted Peter as much as he could eat. A horseman, at that moment, came galloping along, and he stopped at the door and asked the farmer's wife the way to Glassburg Castle. "Heavens!" cried the frightened woman. "Are you going to go to Glassburg?" "Yes," replied the horseman. "I've come for that purpose from distant lands, and I've ridden day and night for 3 months till I have arrived here." "And what are you going to do in the Glassburg?" inquired the woman. "I'm going to procure the golden vase and the diamond spear." "I'm going to procure... Are they such very precious things?" said Silly Peter, putting in his question. far more precious than all the crowns in the world, for the golden vase procures for its possessor everything that he can desire to eat and drink, and has at the same time such magical power that whoever drinks from it is immediately cured for whatever disease he may have, and it even awakens the dead to life if it is put to their lips. But the diamond lance breaks in pieces and destroys everything that has touched with it. And to whom do the golden cup and the diamond lance belong? Said Peter, greatly wondering. A great magician, answered the farmer's wife, who lives on the glass mountain. He may be seen every day on the heath below there, at the edge of the woods, where he sits on his black horse, followed by a colt of 13 months. But no one dares go near him, because in his hand he carries the lance from which there is no deliverance. Yes, said the strange knight, but in his castle of Glassberg he has no use for it. As soon as he comes home, he shuts it up in a subterraneous vault, which no key will fit. I intend to seize him in his own castle. Ah, said the woman, you will never succeed, for many 100 knights have already tried it before you, but not one has ever returned. That is not unknown to me, dear woman, but all those men had not, like me, received counsel from the hermit, the deadly foe of this giant, that will assist me. What did the hermit tell you? Said silly Peter. He told me that I must do first. I must ride through the enchanted forest, where all kinds of enchantment would be put into operation to make me lose my way and to fill me with terror. Almost all who've gone before me have suffered themselves to be beguiled and have perished in the wood of hunger, cold, or exhaustion. And what if you get through the wood or farther? Inquired silly Peter. When I get through the wood, I meet a dwarf with a fiery sword with which he sets everything on fire that it touches. This dwarf keeps guard over an apple tree with golden fruit, one apple of which I must have. And after that, inquired Peter. After that, I find the ho-ho-ho laughing flower, guarded by a lion. You know what a lion is? Whose mane is of poisonous adders. I must pluck the laughing flower and then swim through the lake of the dragon in order to fight with the black giant, who has the iron 9-pin ball that never fails its aim and always returns again to its master. And then I come first into a pleasure garden, where all kinds of expensive amusements will seek to seduce me, but I must touch nothing, but hasten to the river, which has but one fording place. On the other side I am to find a lady dressed in black, who I am to take up behind me on a horse, and learn from her what I am next to do. Well, the farmer's wife attempted to dissuade the knight from his purpose, but he said these were things which women did not understand. But he took her directions as to the road, and giving spur to his horse, he soon vanished behind the trees of the forest. Spoiler alert, he's dead. There's no, return to that point. He should have listened to her. The farmer's wife sighed with regret. She gave Peter some more bread crusts and bade him to go on his way. But just as she was sending him away, her husband came in from the field, He just sent away his herd boy and was in want of another. Fired his herd boy, basically. When he saw silly Peter, it occurred to him that he might engage him for a cowherd. He asked him if he would stay on the farm, take care of the cows. Now, Peter much preferred to devote his time to taking care of himself, and nobody understood better how to while away the whole day in doing nothing than he. But the taste of bacon, the beef, the butter, the fresh bread, and the delicious dumpling that he had relished so much still lingered in his mouth, so he took up with the offer. The man immediately led him out into the field, counted out the cows before him, cut a switch for him to drive the cows with, like a little whip from a stick, if people don't know what a switching stick is, and told him to drive them home at sunset. Thus was silly Peter all at once turned into a cowherd. He must see that the cows did no harm to the fields, and he had to run sometimes from the white to the brown, from the brown to the black, to hinder them from breaking through and getting into the cultivated lands. In other words, keep them out of, like, the corn. Right. They can have the grass. While he was going about in this manner from one side to the other, he heard all at once the tramp of a horse. And looking around, he saw the giant holding the diamond spear, riding through the woods on a black horse, followed by a colt of 13 months, just as it had been described. And around that giant's neck hung the golden cup, and the diamond spear flashed like a blaze. Full of terror, Peter hid himself behind a bush. The giant passed along and rode quietly on his way. And when he'd gone, silly Peter hastened out of his hiding place and looked about for the horse's tracks in order to ascertain the direction the giant had taken. But that was impossible. But look, clever kid. Silly Peter, my butt. Peter, in the meantime, had come... In the meantime, an immense number of knights seeking the way to Glassburg. There came an immense number of knights seeking the Glassburg. Peter never saw any of them return again. But every day the giant appeared at the edge of the wood where he went to ride for pleasure. And at last, Peter became accustomed to the sight of the giant. He no longer concealed himself when the giant came along, but he looked at him, and at last with a somewhat envious glance. For the oftener Peter saw the diamond spear and the golden cup, and the more anxious he became to possess them both. But as Peter was in this respect like most people, that is to say, like an old woman, he continued to wish and to envy. Don't know why old women are catching strays here. One evening, however, Peter was alone, as usual, in the meadow, when all at once a man with a long white beard made an appearance. And remained standing by the edge of the wood. Oh no. It's done its white screen thing. 1 minute. I must close and reopen it. Zombie Wolf says this story is the OG fetch quest. It is, isn't it? All right. Yes, this is intermission music. We're back up. Peter thought it might be another night, who was about to attempt the adventure that had doomed all the others, and he asked him if he sought the way to Glassberg Castle. "I have no need to seek it," said the man. "I know it already." "Then you have returned back safe, and the giant has not killed you?" "He has nothing to fear from me," answered the man with the white beard. "For I am Briak, the sorcerer, and the brother of the giant. When I wish to visit him, I come here and call for the black coat, because otherwise I could not get through the enchanted wood without losing my way. But the colt knows the way." And after saying this, he drew his finger in a 3-fold circle in the sand, murmured a few words softly, and then cried, "Colt so young, colt so black, come quick and take me on thy back." And the colt made its appearance immediately. Briak threw the halter and bridle over him, swung himself upon his back, and rode away into the wood. Peter said nothing of this adventure to anybody, but he thought enough about it himself, for he knew that the first condition of reaching the Glassberg was the black colt, but alas, this knowledge helped him. Well, it helped him very little. For no matter how many times he drew the 3 circles in the sand and called out, "Colt so young, colt so black, come quick and take me on thy back," the colt never appeared. Not the way it did for the wizard. It was necessary for him to think of some other means of getting at the colt, and then it was a most hazardous affair to obtain the golden apple and the laughing flower, to escape the unerring ball of the black giant, and to pass safely through the pleasure garden, but not less did the golden cup and diamond spear take possession of Peter's mind. Peter thought much and long over the matter to contrive how he should bring it about. He could not obtain these things by violence. He was too weak for that. You and me both, buddy. So he must turn his thoughts to stratagem. But the difficulties in the way did not give him any anxiety. "It is the same with them," said he, "as it is with meddlers. When they hang unplucked on the trees, they are hard and sour, but if one gathers them with a little straw and some patience, they grow soft and well-flavored." So he delayed taking any measures for obtaining the black colt till the hour when the giant was in the habit of riding by on his way to the wood. Then he had ready a halter and bridle and a hempen noose, filled a sack with feathers and birdlime, and took with him bacon, which he'd saved from his meals for several days, and a piece of bread, which he rubbed into crumbs, and strewed over the route which the giant with his horse and his 13 months' colt were accustomed to take. You got all that? Because it all comes up. Giant, horse, and colt appeared as usual and crossed over the meadow. But the colt dropped its head to the ground and snuffed. It scented the crumbs, remained behind to eat, and was soon alone. When the giant was too far off to notice it, Peter slipped softly up to the colt, threw the noose over it, and put on the halter and bridle, swung himself upon its back, and suffered the colt, who knew the way, to carry him to the crystal castle, or the castle on the crystal mountain, that is Castle Glassberg. Now Colt took his way straight to the enchanted wood. The colt took his way straight to the enchanted wood, where he struck into the wildest path and flew through it like the wind. Around him, The enchanted wood rose up 1,000 horrible figures. Sometimes an abyss opened before his eyes, into which he thought he and his colt must fall together and break their necks. And sometimes the trees would burst into flames, and he believed he should be burned to death, or frightful rocks would be rent asunder and look as if they were going to fall upon him and crush him into pieces. And he heard moans and shrieks and wild ravings all about him, until his hair stood on end with horror. But Peter kept repeating to himself that it was only magic, it was only magic, it was only magic. And when his fear grew too strong for him, he pulled his cap over his eyes and let the colt go as he would. And thus he came to a level plain where the enchantment ceased. Peter raised his cap and looked about him. Though the enchantment ceased, the horrors did not, for it was a waste, desolate place. All around lay the bones of the knights who'd attempted to reach the Glassberg. Here they lay beside their horses, a prey to the ravenous wolves. At length, Peter reached a meadow which was entirely overshadowed by one single apple tree, so richly laden with fruit that the branches hung down to the earth. Before that tree stood a dwarf with a fiery sword which burned everything it touched. When he saw Peter, he uttered a shrill scream, like that one of a seagull when a storm is threatening, and swung his fearful sword. Peter gave himself no uneasiness, but drew off his cap very politely. "No offense," said he to the dwarf. "I'm going to Glassberg by the order of the Lord of the Castles." "You?" cried the dwarf. "Pray, who are you?" "I am silly Peter, and I am to take service with the Lord of Glassberg. Has he not said any thing to you about it?" "No," said the dwarf, "and I believe that you are an impostor." "With permission," answered Peter, still holding his cap humbly in his hand. "That is not my business. I am a bird catcher. I catch birds and tame them. But do not detain me, for the Lord of Glassberg is expecting me, and he has given me his colt so that I might get here the quicker." The dwarf saw that it really was the giant's colt, and he thought it must indeed be so. Yet he thought it not amiss to ask Peter what he was going to do in Glassberg. "Catch birds," answered Peter. "What else? The sparrows are devouring all the cherries on the trees, so that the people can hardly save any of them." "And how will you destroy him then?" Peter showed him his noose and told him that no bird could hop away with that. "Well, that I must see myself," said the dwarf. "I have numberless sparrows here. Catch me a quantity of them." Peter was delighted. He pretended to tie his colt to a branch of the tree, but instead of that, he fastened one end of the noose to it, and he called to the dwarf to take hold of the other end while he climbed the tree. Then he snatched the noose out of his hand, threw it over him, and thus the dwarf was taken prisoner. He roared with rage and struggled to free himself, but the noose was of threefold twisted hemp, which resisted all enchantment, apparently. Peter sprang quickly on his colt, plucked an apple from the tree, and galloped on his way. He didn't pick up the flaming sword, though, so, like, it's not true D&D. After the meadow came a level field. Beyond that, a great flower garden. And there grew all kinds of beautiful flowers, but in the midst of the garden rose one flower of surpassing elegance, that was the laughing flower. Peter gazed upon it with longing eyes, but the lion with the snaky mane was running around before the entrance, rolling his glowing eyes like a pair of mill wheels and gnashing his teeth furiously. Peter drew up the colt, pulled off his cap, remembering the old saying, with the hat in the hand one may go through the whole land. Then he saluted the lion very politely and asked him if that was the right way to the Glassberg.
And what do you want there?
Said the lion in a terrific voice. Most gracious Mr. Lion, said Peter timidly, a lady whom the Lord of Glassberg knows very well has sent me to bring him the sack full of larks.
Larks,
said the lion, smacking with his tongue.
It is a long time since I've tasted any larks. Have you many?
This whole sack full, replied Peter, showing the sack of larks, feathers, and bird lime. In order that the lion might be more readily believe him, he began to imitate the song of the lark, as he was good to do. And that song made the lion more delighted than ever.
Show me your birds, said he. I'll see if they are fat enough for our master.
Right, willingly, said Peter. Only if I open the sack, they will fly right away.
Well, let me peep in a little.
And that was just what Peter wanted. He took his sack and opened it very little, and the lion poked his head in. If you have a cat, you know how they do this. Poked his hat in to snatch a mouthful of lark, and was immediately stuck fast in a bag of feathers and bird lime, and not a lark in it. Peter pulled the sack over his head and ran to the flower garden, broke off the laughing flower, and rode off. It was not long, then, before he came to Dragon Lake, through which he must swim. He was hardly in the water before the dragon came rushing along to swallow him up. It was of no use to take off the cap. Oh, we were doing so well. Intermission of like 30 seconds. Zombie Wolf says a little straw and a lot of patience, but with these needlessly elaborate instructions. I think what he's saying is not a recipe, but the fact that you need to wait for fruit to be ripe before you eat it. And one way that you can do that without the birds stealing it back in the day was you would put it in storage, but you would wait. Well, not even back in the day. You still do that now. You often pick things kind of still green and then let them sit somewhere with good air circulation, like hay. So no, it's not a recipe. It's just a standard farming practice. It was not long before he came to the Dragon Lake, through which he must swim. And he was hardly in the water before the dragon came, rushing along to swallow him up. It was of no use to take off the cap here, nor was there a word to be said to the dragon, who opened his jaws and snapped at Peter. But Peter had the bacon ready, which he'd brought with him, and he threw a piece of it into the open jaws of the dragon, and the colt bore him swiftly away before he had time to go ahead and be swallowed. Now, he had only to encounter the black giant with the iron bowling ball. I was a little confused the first time I went through this. So just to clarify, the black giant is not the one who rides the horse. This is a separate thing. Peter saw him sitting close by the landing on the opposite shore. The giant's feet were fettered to the rocks, and there he sat, and held in his hand the unfailing ball, which always came back to its master. Kind of like our modern conception of Mjolnir. All around his enormous head, there were 6 great eyes. Which is an interesting conception of a giant. I've seen them have 6 eyes because they have 3 heads, but not a ring of eyes around him. That's very cool. That watched by in turns, so that while 2 of them slept, the other 4 were constantly spying about like a clock round his head. Luckily, the 2 eyes that were turned towards Peter were asleep. Peter sat down very softly, and he began to imitate the songs of different birds. At first he sang like a lark. Wah, wah, wah. Then one more of the giant's eyes fell asleep, completely ravished by his song. And then he began to warble like a nightingale. And the giant stretched and yawned. And after a little while, 2 more eyes closed in sleep. And now Peter drew his flute out of his pocket and played it upon the air, so melting, so charming, that the last eye sunk in slumber, and the whole giant was asleep. Swiftly sped Peter to his colt, held his rein lightly till he had passed by the giant, and at length happily arrived at the entrance of the pleasure garden. This was a most delightful garden, filled with enticing fruit, flowers, and fountains. And the fountains threw up jets of delicious wine, and the flowers sang with the most bewitching voices, and the fruits were all kinds of dainties, which flew towards him of their own accord, not even needing to be picked. And at the end of each shaded walk stood tables as richly spread as if kings had been going to feast there. And the smell of rich pastry regaled the nose. Pompous servants offered the best and handsomest of everything, and charming maidens presented wine, seeming ready to join in the dance. That was a heavy trial for silly Peter. All his former perils were trifling compared with this. He snuffed the delicious odors, and his mouth watered for the tempting delicacies, and his eyes were riveted on the flying fruits and the inviting banquet tables, and if he had not that very moment remembered the diamond spear and the golden cup, Peter would certainly have surrendered here. But he did remember it. Thank God for our story, and so he made use of the previous precaution of pulling his cap over his face and drew his flute out of his pocket and played so merrily that he could no longer hear the seductive songs of the maidens or the flowers, and thanks to the fleetness of his horse, he withstood the most dangerous trial to his food-loving belly. Anyhow, as he came out of the garden, the Glassberg gleamed upon his sight, and in his joy Peter had almost forgotten that in order to reach the castle he must cross the river with only one ford, but he was reminded of this by seeing a lady in black sitting on a high rock on the other shore. The colt knew all the ways, so of course he knew the way to find the ford, and approached the lady. She wore black satin and looked as a gypsy girl. She was dressed in yellow. And I don't know what that sentence connects to. This is one of the messier ones. Peter got off the horse and drew off his cap very obsequiously. Asked her if she would like to be taken over the river. No, we were doing so well. It's weird that it was fine for a long time, and now it's having many troubles. I don't actually think this is my computer, by the way. I think it's something to do with a recent update to Calibri. I have been waiting for you, said the lady. Come nearer, so that I can get up on the saddle behind you. Peter did as she said, took her up behind him on the colt, and rolled again through the river. And when they were in the midst of the river, the lady said, Do you know who I am? I crave your pardon, said Peter, but judging from your dress, you must be noble and powerful. Noble, replied the lady. I certainly am, because my lineage dates from the beginning of the world. And powerful I am also, because all men must yield to me if I will. And pray, what is your name? Said Peter. My name is the Plague. At these words, Peter sprung up in terror from the horse and was about to throw himself into the river when the Plague said, Keep your seat quietly, Peter. I will do you no harm. On the contrary, I think I may be needful to you. Is it possible, Miss Plague? Cried Peter, who drew off his cap without putting it on again. Will you be so good? Ah, yes, he added thoughtfully to himself. I have been told that you would aid me against the magician of Glassberg. Yes, answered the Plague. The magician must die. That will be just what I want, Mrs. Pest. But he is immortal.
Listen, Peter, and pay strict attention. The apple tree guarded by the dwarf with the fiery sword is an offcut of the tree, the fruit of which once changed men from immortals to mortals. The apples of this tree have still the same power, and you must see that the magician eats of it, and then I will touch him, and he will instantly die.
I will try, answered Peter. But when he is dead, how shall I come to the golden cup and the diamond spear? They are in a subterranean vault that no key can unlock.
The laughing flower has the power of opening all doors, answered the plague, and it lights up the darkness as brightly as the sun.
And it was during this discourse they reached the other shore and took their way towards Glassberg. And at the entrance of Glassberg there was a great canopy, under the shade of which the giant was reposing. Can I save it? Or am I screwed? Oh, it's getting so fussy. It was not this fussy earlier, by the way. Maybe it just doesn't like this page? I don't know. Under the shade of which the giant was reposing. He was sitting cross-legged, like the rich lord of the manor, who has just reaped a rich harvest, and he was smoking a golden pipe. When he saw Peter with the lady in black coming towards him on his black colt, he cried out in an angry voice that resounded like thunder in the mountains.
By the powers, there is silly Peter riding on my 13 months colt.
Yes, I am silly Peter, most powerful lord under the sun, said Peter, dismounting.
And pray, how did you get here?
I've done as your brother Briac taught me. I went to the edge of the wood and called out, "Colts, so young and colts so black, come quick and take me on thy back." And then the colt came directly.
And you know my brother?
He is my master.
And why has he sent you hither?
To bring you 2 presents, which he just received from Ethiopia. The apple of delight and the virgin meekness. If you eat the apple, your heart will all the time experience the delight which a poor man feels who suddenly discovers in his empty pockets 100 golden pieces. And if you take the maiden into your service, there will be nothing left upon earth for you to wish for.
Help the maiden down from the horse and hand me the apple.
Peter reached him with the apple in hand, and then went back to the plague to assist her to dismount that black colt. And the giant eagerly bit the apple. And then Plague hastened up and touched him, and he instantly fell dead to the ground. Peter then went into the palace with the laughing flower in his hand. He passed through one after another more than 50 rooms until he came at last to the silver door. This immediately sprang open before the laughing flower. There lay the golden cup and the diamond spear. But hardly had he grasped them when the earth heaved beneath his feet, and a frightful crash was heard. And the palace and the Plague had vanished together, and Peter found himself with his 2 treasures in the midst of a thick wood. Nothing daunted, he traveled on, soon reached the court of a neighboring king, and on the way, however, he bought the richest garments and the finest horse that were to be found. The king was in great distress. He was involved in a war with a powerful adversary who had besieged him in his capital city. The enemy pressed closely upon him, and there was no longer a mouthful of bread to be had in the city, and meat was not even to be thought of. And in his extremity he had promised his daughter in marriage to anyone who would come to his relief. And it was then that Peter made his appearance before the king, and said that he would rescue him and the kingdom. "How can you do that?" said the king. "Our people are but a handful. The enemy, on the contrary, is strong, and you are but a single man." But Peter did not allow himself to be discouraged. He placed himself at the head of the soldiers and led on an attack. Before his diamond spear, down sank all that he touched. And if one of his party fell, he hastened to him and held the golden cup to his lips, and the dead instantly rose to life and health and continued the combat. At length the enemy were beaten and their whole country conquered, and the king kept his promise, gave his daughter in marriage to Peter, and made him heir to his whole kingdom. Thus did silly Peter, whom everybody regarded as a simpleton, become a great prince. But that was because he never boasted or gave himself out for any great things. I think it probably had more to do with the magic, but okay. But quietly thought within himself how it would be best to act, because discretion transcends force. Or if only one begins right, one can accomplish a great deal. Just says, warning, language may be offensive to some viewers. Did I swear or something? Did I swear at the program when it crashed again? Or is that a joke? GS says, should I be as simple as Peter? I mean, obviously he's not simple. At no point does he behave simply, to the extent that I honestly think that is the takeaway you're supposed to take, that they just assumed he was simple because he wasn't tutored or whatever, but he was quite clever. Wolf says, well, not as outrageous as Simple Hands, but Simple Peter undoubtedly has the best ending indeed. I do need the repost, Zombie Wolf. The random trivia from Zombie Wolf. Any month that starts on a Sunday will have a Friday the 13th. I wanted to mention this since there's a Friday the 13th this month. Oh, very cool. GS says, joke when your program crash. Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, we're about 10 seconds away from hearing that Scottish blood. Tammy says, thank you, Rory, for the wonderful stories. Thank you for your stream and well wishes and sweet thoughts. Hopefully I have good news to report on Thursday. I mean, the best news would be just that they aren't going to keep you in misery for too long, that you can just get it done, move on with your life with your happy little dog. Jumpstore says, isn't this just Hermes and Argos trying to steal back Alo? It was a thought that crossed my mind, and you probably are correct that has an influence. A lot of folklore is influenced by Greek mythology via Rome, right? Rome kind of had a thing for Greek mythology and spread it pretty far and wide as Rome went. So yeah, it's not unreasonable to think that might be part of the story. There's lots of little bits of Greek myth and a lot of folklore. Jump Store says, thanks for the stories, Rory. I hope it'll be over this migraine by Thursday. I hope so too. I'm going to do the same thing that I was trying to do last week, Thursday. I really don't know if it's going to act up again. I've been using my computer all week and it's been fine, but I'd also been using my computer all week and it was fine, and then Thursday it just wasn't. I have theories. None of them are confirmed. Anyways. Lizzie Rose says, Peter is so cute. Yeah, I think he's a really endearing protagonist. I appreciate that. I think it's probably more the hand of the translator and collector here than the original tale, but they definitely put some work into making him a sort of a full character with a good character arc and his own personal style. And yeah. Anyways, I found it to be a very rich and interesting story, and I'm glad you guys liked it as well. Given that we've gone so long, I'm going to call it there. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're lurking, that's fine. Thank you for lurking. I'm glad you are enjoying your lurk, I hope. And as for the rest, of course, I hope you have a better week. And thank you for the kind words on the video that I sort of did in lieu of a stream I couldn't do. But nonetheless, I'll keep the fire going. You folks have a good sleep.